The point would be if CNN anchors are at the 2016 convention saying, what the hell is going on? That's kind of reflective of the point that I was making, that you guys should have seen this coming and should have known what was going on, where this where was this anger coming from?
Just because we're
Ryan Grimm and Emily Jashinsky of Breaking Points did a 2024 recap of some of their favorite interviews that they've done, and it's a good watch. You can check that out on the Breaking Points channel. What I want to focus on in this clip is the conversation they had with Don Lemon, specifically about the sort of mainstream, he was on CNN at the time, sort of mainstream media coverage of Bernie Sanders in 2016 and how Don Lemon thought that all played out. It's not a shouting match. It's not controversial. I just think it's really interesting to hear from an insider who had since been ousted from CNN based on comments that he made. They touch on that at the beginning. Anyway, I'm going to watch this with you. I'm going to give you my comments, and then I want to know what you think in the comments section. But let's take a listen.
Lemon was so interesting because he was such an influential media figure, and it was really interesting to get a window into how he sees the world. So let's roll a little Don Lemon here.
I have a question on that, actually, because I don't think either of us is interested in getting into any drama with your old network, but I do think the Nikki Haley comment, I found it hilarious, frankly, but we don't have to get into it. All I want to say is, was that an excuse to purge you? Do you feel like do you think that your former colleagues cared deeply about Nikki Haley's feelings, or do you think that was sort of a fig leaf to start purging maybe allies of Jeff Zucker? What's your read on that whole situation? Because you did, I think, apologized for it, and everything sort of spiraled from there, it seemed like, from the outside at least.
Look at my face.
In your prime.
I will let your comments stand. If you think, I think that you are a very smart woman, and I will just let it stand.
In her prime, no doubt, right?
Of course.
So one of the criticisms I had of CNN over the years is around its coverage of the kind of left wing of the Democratic Party, and in particular, missing the kind of the energy behind the 2016 Bernie Sanders campaign, and then missing it again the second time around. Like, 2020, Bernie Sanders almost seized the nomination, and it seemed to catch the media flat-footed both times. I'm curious what your editorial meetings were like throughout 2016 and 2020, or was there just so much Trump that there just wasn't kind of the oxygen for the Democratic primaries?
I want to make sure I understand what you're saying, Brian. What are you asking me, that you think that Bernie Sanders wasn't given his due in traditional media? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And let me tell you a little story about that real quick. Like, so in February of 2020, you remember Rebecca Cutler, the old head of CNN talent? Mm-hmm. She reached out to or somehow we got connected. I went back, still at The Intercept, but I was at The Intercept at the time. And she said, look, we have really missed the boat on covering the left wing of the Democratic Party. Like, we need people who have covered that before and who understand this rising progressive energy. And so CNN brought me in and said, look, we need to get you on some of these programs because we need somebody, who can speak to this obviously now rising energy within the Democratic Party. And then that happened a couple times. And then Bernie lost the South Carolina primary and got wiped out on Super Tuesday. And they said, actually, never mind, we're good. Like, we don't need to worry about this kind of progressive wing. Maybe in 4 years if it bubbles back up. But there was a fear inside CNN, reflected through Rebecca's outreach, that they had missed something fundamental about the country that was represented by the rise of Bernie Sanders.
I don't know what conversation you had with Rebecca, who I know, and so I won't get into that. But I think if there was any outreach for you to cover something that was happening in the news or the zeitgeist politically, I think that Rebecca should be commended for recognizing that. The second part is that I've never heard anybody say that CNN should be more left. So, hey, there's a first time for everything. I didn't necessarily think CNN was left. I thought that CNN was about facts. I think CNN has the best journalists in the world. But I also think you asked me what my editorial meetings were like. I mean, no one was trying to push Bernie Sanders, and at least in my editorial meetings. And I would venture to speak for the network now. Well, I'll speak for myself. I don't think that anyone was trying to push Bernie Sanders out. I think that Bernie Sanders may have had sort of outsized influence with a certain segment of the Democratic Party. But all polls in 2016 pointed to Hillary Clinton. All polls in 2020 and public sentiment pointed to Joe Biden. And so what was shocking, I think, to myself was the reaction from Democrats to the nomination of Hillary Clinton instead of Bernie Sanders. In 16, especially in 2020, I couldn't get to gauge it because I didn't get to go to the conventions. I think that was around, because of COVID. But here's a shocking thing. So networks have editorial calls or meetings with campaigns, right, to figure out how you're going to cover the campaigns. In my experience, having those editorial calls and meetings with the Trump folks, they knew every single thing that was happening in the media. Every single thing that Don Lemon had ever said about Donald Trump, his folks knew about it. They knew where to place him. They knew who they wanted him to talk to. They knew who they wanted him to call into or do in-person interviews. By contrast, the Clinton campaign was so above it that, they had no idea what I was saying about Hillary Clinton or whatever they were, she did not have as much media outreach. She got to pick and choose where she went, and rather than just doing what Donald Trump did. So listen, I think that the Hillary, but yet and still, the public wanted Hillary Clinton. They didn't want Bernie Sanders. So I say that to say, when after all of, Republicans did not love Donald Trump. They held their nose and they voted for him. All of the never Trumpers, all of the people, from Ted Cruz on down, when he became the nominee, everyone got behind him. When we were at the convention, it was Trump, 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 Trump. It wasn't Jeb. It wasn't, Cruz. It wasn't Rubio. It wasn't any of those people. By the time we got to the Democratic convention and Hillary Clinton was a nominee, people were yelling, Bernie, Bernie. And we were like, what the hell is going on? So I think that Bernie Sanders, that wing of the Democratic Party actually did as much, if not more damage to Hillary Clinton than Donald Trump. So look,
but I think that's an interesting question to be asking, to say what.
I think Bernie Sanders is a fantastic politician, but I do think that there is a lesson in it for Democrats that you have to get behind the person who is the actual nominee, and you cannot have sour grapes with the person who did not become the nominee. That's how the process worked. So I know that people are upset, and they're upset about the progressive wing, and they don't think it gets covered enough. But this is where we are. The nominee or the person is Joe Biden. The nominee or the person then was Hillary Clinton. I think the Bernie Sanders progressive wing of the party should have gotten behind them. And that's the reason, one of the reasons, the main reasons that we're in the predicament that we are now and that we had a Trump presidency.
But I guess the point would be, if CNN anchors are at the 2016 convention saying, what the hell is going on? That's kind of reflective of the point that I was making, that you guys should have seen this coming and should have known what was going on, where was this anger coming from?
Just because we're realistic about who the nominee is, doesn't mean that we didn't see it coming. Bernie Sanders was not going to win. Bernie Sanders was not going to be the nominee. So I turned to my producer and said that. I'm not saying this on the air, but maybe I did say it on the air. I was surprised because Republicans fall in line. Democrats fight each other. Democrats usually wet the bed. I'm sorry. Bernie Sanders was not the nominee, nor was he ever going to become the nominee. And I know that people are upset by it, but that's the truth. It's the same thing for Republicans. Nikki Haley is not the nominee. She's not going to become the nominee. Donald Trump is a nominee, regardless if you like it or not. The guy's in court. And guess what? Republicans are going to fall in line. And if Donald Trump becomes the president again, it'll be because Republicans fell in line.
Brian, people loved your barb at Don Lemon, by the way.
Which barb?
The one where you said that I was in my prime.
Oh.
Which barb? Yeah, there were a few. You threw a few of them in there.
Yes. He got actually one of, I think, a contributing factor to his firing was
It was
saying that something about women not being in their prime or something?
Well, we asked him about this. Actually made a little bit of news. He said he believed that was used as an excuse to get rid of him, was sort of cooked up as an excuse to get rid of him.
You know, I realize that I didn't interject at all there, but I do think Don Lemon's sort of defense of CNN and kind of implicitly the entire media machine illustrates the point, right? Saying, look, Bernie was never going to become the nominee, but that ignores their participation in controlling the conversation. I honestly, looking back on it, I know hindsight's 2020, but a lot of this conversation around what percentage of the rights, this sort of Cenk Uyghur's idea of the populist right, voted for Trump, believing some of the populist things he said that actually echo the list of grievances that Bernie Sanders was identifying that specifically have to do with economic inequality in America. People saying, oh, people didn't want Bernie, people wanted Hillary. Clearly they didn't, right? And so we can talk about polls, or we could talk about what percentage of people didn't, or how misogyny plays into two Democratic losses where the nominee was a woman. I don't have evidence to back this up. In my gut, if it had been Bernie Trump in 2016, Bernie would have won in a landslide, because while he wouldn't have gotten the racists and the deplorables, he would have gotten people that are angry about the sort of state of the grocery store America. You know, inflation wasn't a thing as specifically at the time, but people could feel how inequality was making their lives harder and minimum wage hadn't been increased. And, you know, this has been Bernie's platform from the beginning. And I think it resonates with a lot of Americans because it's just true. Anyway, I want to know what you think in the comments.